Hi, and welcome back to our creative sewing videos. Today we are going to do a very simple panel quilt done from Benartex fabrics. It's the Glowosaurus.
That is so cute.
It's an adorable panel. And of course, because it is a Glowosaurus panel, when you turn out the lights, it glows in the dark.
I was going to say, let me guess.
And actually, so do almost all of the fabrics that we're making from here.
Cool.
So to start with, the Glowosaurus panel is cut down. You are going to cut it. Trims 36 inches wide by 44 inches wide. Long. And then you're going to just do a simple border. So these green bones are going to go on. You're going to sew them on the side and then sew them on the top and the bottom. From that point on, they added a little bit to make it a little more interesting. And so what they've done is they've added some half square triangles. We good lined up?
Yep.
All right. We've got some half square triangles that create a border for the top and the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go ahead and show you how to do those half square triangles. We'll talk a little bit about the border. And then
does
we'll
it
talk
have
about
appliques?
It has gorgeous appliques at the bottom as well.
Those are so cute.
And what I love about them is they're like very much in the foreground.
Sure.
So it gives the panel the quilt some dimensionality to it.
Nice.
All right, so let's work with the half square triangles. If you want to swing around, Pam. We're going to be making the half square triangles out of a green bone fabric and a blue bone fabric. So our initial squares are 5 1/4 inches. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the lighter one, which is the green, and we're going to draw a line. Let me see if we have a ruler that's long enough. From one corner to the other corner. So this is a very traditional way of doing half square triangles. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take the blue bone fabric, right side, pretty side facing up. We're going to line up the green bone fabric facing down. So we've got right sides together. Let's go ahead and do this. I drew a line on that previously. All right. And then what we want to do is we want to sew 1/4 inch on either side of this. This one set of squares is going to net us 2 blocks. So we're going to take it, we're going to line up on the side of our 1/4 inch foot. This would be one of the times where I don't necessarily want to have a guide on my 1/4 inch foot because sometimes it'll drag on the fabric. So if you have just a regular 1/4 inch foot, or for that matter, you could line up using your regular foot and maybe move your needle position over till you get 1/4 inch. And so we're just going to run down, running the edge of the foot along the line. Because we're doing multiples of them, we can sew from one and then sew over to the next. And so you can just do this, quick piecing style. Once we get to the end, we'll cut our thread. I like to separate them just because I find it's easier for me to deal with them and they're not all twisty or that kind of thing.
You take the challenge out of it.
Yeah. Remember, quilting is fun. And so we'll run down on our next one and we'll line up for the next one here. And so you will continue to do that until you get all of the half square triangle units sewn. You're then going to take and we're going to cut along that blue line. Now, things that are important and things that are not. You do not need to have, I don't feel the need to grab a ruler and the rotary cutter to cut down this line. Simply cutting down the center of the line is certainly fine. Okay, and we are going to press these to the darker fabric, which is going to be our blue fabric. So Pam can sing the Jeopardy song. And,
She get a little sign that says she's ironing.
and we're going to do a quick press. Okay. So we now have our squares, and what's lovely about this is they make them so that they are a little bit larger and in the directions. And by the way, I didn't even really mention it. This is a free pattern from Benartex.
So is it benartex.com?
Yep, and Patricia will put the link down at the bottom so they can just go and print that off there. All right, and so when we are done, we're going to take that and we're going to make sure that these are 4.5 inches. So we're just going to take our rotary ruler and we're going to line up and we're going to find 4.5. So you'll see it's deliberately done where they are a little bit larger than the actual finished size. So if we had a little blurb, it won't be a crisis.
Never.
Now, when we go to cut this, I like to use a square up ruler because square up rulers have got a line that runs down the center of the quilt. Which way are we going? There we go. The center of the ruler. And so you'll see that it starts up here at 0 and it goes from 0 to 6.5 on this side and 0 to 6.5 on this side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up. I'm just making certain that I'm going to cover, my 4.5 will get cut out of this block. And then we're going to come in and we're going to clean up the edges. So that takes care of the first edge. We're then going to rotate the block, but not the ruler. And we're going to put the cleaned up edges down here at the bottom. So left and bottom. And so now I'm going to line up the 4.5 inch line on each one of those. And we're just going to come in and we're going to trim up our block.
That's kind of nice if you have a fabric that stretches a little bit too.
Absolutely. So we'll come in and do the same thing for each one of our blocks. So top and the right hand side. Just trying to avoid those other blocks. I didn't cut my block. There we go. And then we'll flip it around and we'll line up at the 4.5. So we'll have those. And we do 2 more. So you can see how it's very forgiving. And our last one. Okey-doke. All right, so now we have our blocks done. We now want to join them together so that we're creating blue triangles. So we're going to line them up like that. We're going to go ahead and do our sewing. 1/4 inch seam again. And then the pattern recommends that we press the seam allowances open. So we're going to take this over to the ironing board, and unlike normal where we press to one side, what we're trying to do is make that bulk, that
like
point
you're making
a
a
little
skirt.
less bulky. Yep. Absolutely. Okey-doke. And so when we do a border, we should have 5 of those blue triangles. So we're going to line up like this, line up like that, and we'll line up like that. So we'll come in and we'll do our pieces.
And do you press the seam allowances on all of them?
Open,
Yeah.
it is actually helpful, so
Okay.
even as we come together and do that. And a little trick that I found is when you're stitching, because you've got all that bulk at the bottom there, if you take it and you stitch from the top
Oh.
and go to the seam, you're less likely to have the block get eaten on there. All right. So we'll sew all of these together and then we will stitch that onto the bottom. So let me take the quilt down, Pam, and we'll have you go around to the front of the table. All right. So we have our borders. So we have the panel itself.
Yep.
We've got the green bones, and then we're going to line up our blue triangles up against the green bones, and we're going to stitch that on. Okay, so I'll be doing that same thing up at the top, and I'll be stitching that onto the top of our panel. So one pointing up blue triangles, one pointing down blue triangles. Now, once you have that done, what I recommend that you do, because in patterns, in a perfect world, our math is going to line up exactly the same as the math in the pattern. But the next border that goes on is going to be a blue border, so it's going to be this border here, and it's going to have cornerstones. And oftentimes you have quilts that the last border has got a cornerstone, a little square in the center. And so I use this trick before I get my borders on, right? So I'm ready to go on to that next border. I now take, before I start stitching the border on, and I take a measurement. So I will measure it across. And so we have 42 and a half inches. So if you have 42 and a half inches and the pattern says it should be something else, you're cutting it for your quilt on there. So what I've done is I've taken and I've cut my next border. I cut 2 pieces at 42 and a half inches. Okay, I'll then sew my squares on, which I've done here. Okay, and then I'm going to have those pieces prepped. So I try to do that before I get the side ones on, because of course that's what everybody wants to do, put the side ones on, and then you have to start going like, okay, I'm sewing from seam to seam, I got to add a 1/4 inch seam because I'm going to sew the block on, and it just is like a bad math problem. So if you stop at this point, before you go to do the last border, do your quick measurement, and then cut your piece in. Okay? So we will sew the triangle border at the top. I will take my side border and apply that to the side. So you just sew it on, and we'll clip it at the end. And then we will go ahead and we will sew the blocked border on the side. Now I'm going to pause so that we can sew these so that you don't have to watch me sewing long seams. And we will come back and I will show you the applique. Welcome back. And we have our borders completed. So you can see how we had the panel, We had the green border that went around, just kind of standard border stuff. And then this is our half square triangle unit. So the blue triangles are facing up on the top one and down on the bottom one. And then we added our blue strips to the side. And then the unit that we measured for was put on the top and the bottom. So at that point, you could be completely done on this quilt. Okay, however, they have provided the cutest appliques ever. So when we look at the appliques, we've got this little guy on your right, and then we have this little one on the left. So the little one on the right, I've actually already fused onto the quilt. The little one on the left has way more pieces, and I just thought I would show you my process of doing the applique. So the first thing that we need to do, and so we can come down now, Pam. The first thing that we need to do is we need to trace and cut the pieces. So we want to come, and let me come to you. They've given you the patterns, which is lovely. And so we're going to come in and we're going to lay over our fusible for our applique. And the fusible that I like to use is Steam-A-Seam 2 Light. That way, when you fuse the appliques on, they're not so stiff. And so it's not like you've got like this soft, squishy quilt and then all of a sudden you have this really stiff applique. So on Steam-A-Seam Light 2, there are two pieces of paper. One is plain and one has a grid on it. Can you pick up the grid with the camera? Yep. It's kind of a strange yellow color here. All right, and so what we're going to do is we're going to trace around the shapes. So once again, using all those kindergarten skills. All right, use more of those kindergarten skills than I do the advanced math. And so you're going to trace the shape. We'll then take it and we're going to rough cut it. So not cut the circle out, but just get myself a small enough piece that I can peel that back piece of paper. And of all of the things that you're going to do on this quilt, this is the most challenging. There we go. And so we're going to peel the piece of paper off and we're going to be left with the drawing on the grid side. And we're going to place that on the back side of our applique fabric. Now I'm doing the pupil for his eye, and so the black fabric is solid, so it's the same on both sides. But you know, not everything is going to be that way, so make sure that we're pressing on the back side. And then we're going to come in and we're going to hit it with the iron. Once it's heated and fused, we're then going to come in and we're going to trim away on the line. So we'll get rid of all of that excess. And then our design is ready. And the trick that I use to get the paper off once it's fused is if you twist it like you're going to rip it, the paper will rip, but the fabric will not, and you will then be able to pull that off, and you're left with a fusible web on the back. Now, what's lovely about Steam-A-Seam 2 Light is it's slightly tacky. So we can go ahead and we can place these things in position and like maneuver them around, but you know, if the cat jumps up on the ironing board, it's not going to knock everything off on there. So let's get rid of these pieces here and let's show you putting this together. All right. So the first thing when I'm doing a more complicated applique that I do is I get my Teflon pressing sheet out. So the Teflon pressing sheet is going to allow me to essentially put the applique together before I physically put it on the quilt. It will fuse it down, it'll stick, but then it'll be able to be peeled up. So the first bit of our little, I don't know what it is, and I'm sure the kids will know, is going
Yep.
is going to be the body of our little dinosaur. We'll just call him a dinosaur. We'll be safe that way. All right. So the second piece that we're going to do is the yellow. So we're going to take the yellow and we're going to place the yellow on. And so we're going to line it up. And there's no perfection here. You know, I'm just looking at the picture and just kind of lining it up roughly what the author of the pattern did. Then I'm going to take basically the head of my dinosaur. And our neighbors are working on their store. If you can hear the banging. All right, so what I'm looking at is I'm looking at the picture and my yellow is just basically at his jawline and the top of it is right at the top of his little ruffle here. All right, next thing that we need to do is he has little horns and the horns kind of point downward in the picture. And so the first one is going to get tucked underneath. And so this is why kind of doing a pre-setup on your applique is so much better. Because if I had already fused it down to the fabric, I would have had a problem getting it underneath. And then we're going to take and we're going to place this second one on top. So we'll get about like that. So we're looking to be pretty close to the picture. Maybe a little bit, I'll make him a little bit further up. Yeah, that looks good. And so we'll get a little bit of dimension that way because they're overlapping. All right, next thing we need to do is what they refer to as his beak. And so his beak is going to go on the bottom part of the jaw is going to go there, and then we're going to overlap it. And we're going to have that part there. And then we have a little horn that's going to go on top of that. So we'll line that up like that.
There's quite a few parts.
He has a lot of parts. That's why I thought I'd show this one because doing it this way is very, very easy to do. All right, last things that we need is his little eye. And his eye has two parts. It has the actual kind of eyeball, and then it has his pupil going along like that.
Very handsome.
Yes, he's looking very good. All right, so now we are ready to go for our pressing. And so we're going to go, if you need to make any adjustments, do it now, because right now is going to be it, right? So I'm happy with the way he's looking. And so now we're going to take the iron and we're going to fuse on the fabric. So it's kind of a 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and working our way around. We don't have to fuse it as hard as we will when we do the fabric, because right now really all we're trying to do is fuse the fabrics together. We don't really care because we're going to peel it up off of this. Iron's a little dirty there. All right, so we've got that going on like that. All right, so we are now ready to peel off this applique. And so we're just going to take it. I always let it cool just a little bit.
Yes, we don't want to go to patient first.
Yes, when you get back from the burn unit. And we're just going to peel it off, and you'll see that the applique comes up as one unit. And you'll also see why we don't really want to fuse it super hard to the Teflon sheet, because then it would be harder for it to. And ta-da, we have our dinosaur ready to go. And so we can now put our Teflon sheet off to the side. Let me get the quilt down. going to be lined up in the left-hand corner of our quilt. So we're going to tuck our quilt on there. And I'm using a pressing board, which is something that we made. We went to Lowe's and got a 3/4 inch piece of plywood that was already cut 24 by 24. And we covered it with a little bit of cotton batting, and then we covered it with some fabric and staple gunned it to the back. But it is fabulous when you're doing these larger appliques, because then you, on your ironing board, which is narrower, sometimes you have to do a lot of shifting. All right, so we have got our applique lined up on the edge here, and so we are ready to fuse. And so we're going to come in, and now we're going to go 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and we're just going to work our way around the applique.
Fusing it ahead of time really does help, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and then you don't have that. You have that, like, safety valve that, oh, I'm not as, you know, I want to shift that. Once it's down to the fabric, it's a challenge to get it back up. But on the Teflon sheet, not an issue. And so I work basically from one side to the other and just give it a quick press. And so ta-da, we now have our applique done. So we'll get rid of the ironing board here, and you'll see our little guy is on the bottom there. And then let's show you our other guy, which is over here. Aren't they adorable?
They are.
Now, the author of the pattern has a little bit of detail marking. So on this one, it's one big piece of yellow and then just his eye and his nostril. But for definition, he has like a little bit where his eye is. He has a mouth, and then he also has a little chin. And so I would take a washable marker and just mark those in so that when we're stitching it, we have a line to follow. And this is one of those blue washable markers, so you can just use the eraser pen on the other part of the marker. So you can redraw and draw as much as you'd like. She gives you a picture so that you can kind of follow her lines. All right, now we're going to clear the table. And we're going to show you just a little bit with doing some applique. All right. So to set up your machine to do applique, we're going to start by putting on a different foot. So this on a Bernina foot, this is a 20C. Okay, and you'll notice that it has nothing between you and the needle. So it's what they refer to as an open toe applique foot. And if you look at the back side of it, it has a groove cut out of it. So there's a lot of choices for what you applique, what stitch you applique with. You could do a satin stitch. A satin stitch is a zigzag at a very short stitch setting, so like 0.5 in stitch length. And if you're that short and close together, you'll find that the thread will feed out the bottom of the foot very easily. Today I'm going to do a blanket stitch, and once again it puts down a good amount of thread, and so the foot will make it work much easier. And then of course being open in the front makes it so much better for doing applique. So we're going to come in, I'm going to select my stitch, and I'm going to start over here at his chin. And I'm going to come around and I'm going to go to the tip of his mouth. So we'll line up, And a little trick that you can do on some machines and not all machines. Some machines allow you to maneuver your decorative stitches like a needle position like you would with a straight stitch. And so I can do that on this machine. And so what I like to do is I like to move my, blanket stitch over to the right. And then what I can do is I can use the inside edge of my toe of my foot as my guide. If you can't, then leave it in the center and you're just going to eyeball it as you go. So we'll start out, we're going to take it, we're going to get started. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hold on to the fabric just a little bit and let it do a double stitch so that we have a nice anchor. And then we're going to start taking off, and I'm going to be following that line. So I'm just running that line right up against the right hand inner part of this toe on the foot. And so we'll go along like this. Now I'm going to get to the edge. If I'm doing a blanket stitch, I would like my the straight part of the blanket stitch to be on the background, and then I want the prong to go onto my applique. So we're just lining it up. Once again, I'm just using the edge of that toe as my guide. And this isn't like super fast stitching, but it is a baby quilt and it'll get run through the wash 1,000 times. So you want it secure. So we're getting around to the bottom of his mouth. And I'm going to come right up to the line, and once again I'm going to hold on to the fabric a little bit and let it overstitch. We're then going to cut our thread, and then I'm going to hop over and I'm going to start at his mouth, and I'm going to work around the dinosaur coming up. Now, thread color, you could totally do whatever color you want. Pam said to me this morning when we were getting started here, she goes, "Oh, don't forget yellow thread." And I'm like, I'm doing it in black.
And I stand corrected.
But yeah, you could totally do whatever. Like if you want the edge of the dinosaur to kind of fade in, then do a matching color. If you want it to really stand out, then do something contrasting. If you don't want to change a whole bunch of colors, black or gray are always great applique choices. Now, you'll notice with my applique, because my blanket stitch is fairly small, because of the fusing action, I can actually stitch this without stabilizer. But you may want to take a little sample, like fuse a piece of fabric to another scrap piece, and then run a sample and see if your stitch is going to look nice and flat. If it feels like it's pinching it together, then go ahead and put a stabilizer underneath of it. My favorite for blanket stitching is Sulky Tear Easy, because it does what its name says, it tears away easily. If we were doing a satin stitch where we were doing the zigzag, then I would go with Pellon Stitch and Tear, which is a little bit beefier because it'll hold up to that really thick zigzag going along. Now, at some point on your applique, you're going to get to the point where you're like, I need to pick up my foot and pivot. If you get to that point, because we are working on an outside curve all the way along, and I'll need to fuse that down a little better, I always stop on the outside. So in other words, whether you're doing a satin stitch or a blanket stitch, I'm always going to be stopping with my needle in the background. In doing that, when I pick up my foot and I pivot, I'm going to get a normal looking stitch. So the blanket stitch isn't going to have like a wedge to it. In a satin stitch, if you were to stop on the inside, on the applique side, you would get a little section that wasn't covered in thread. So on an outside curve, always stop on the outside so it's easy to remember. All right, so off we go. So I'm coming to a point where I need to pivot. So I'm going to stop that needle on the outside. We're going to pick up. We're going to pivot it around and start again. And the only other recommendation that I have is when you are doing an applique on a big quilt like this. We've got a lot of fabric here. We're going to be pivoting and turning. Just watch the other end of your quilt. It's so easy to get it tucked underneath. So make sure when you're working with it, kind of smooth it so you can feel that you're only working with the one layer of quilt and then the applique itself. We'll stitch over this little section that I didn't get fused down really well. No need to stop, just kind of finger hold it in place. And then when I take this off of the machine, I'll take it back to the ironing board and I'll press that area. Better not to have a kind of stop-start on the edge of your applique and your stitching. All right, get another pivot. We'll send some of that fabric through, but you can see how doing the edge of the applique, it really starts to give him definition. So we're going to come up to that line and then I'm going to stop. I'm going to let it kind of anchor in and then we'll cut that and we'll start down at the bottom of our line. And then off we go. Try and catch the end of that one line right in the applique stitch, and then pick up, pivot. And as kind of a general rule for applique, if you can, if it's visually further away from you, I try to stitch that first. So let me get around this little section here and we'll be able to see it a little better. All right, if I swing this around, Pam, can you see it in the camera? All right, going like that. Can you see that okay? Mm-hmm. All right, so on his little forehead kind of bit, his eye here would be further behind. So we stitched on that first and then brought this up over, and it gives you a little bit of 3D depth. The same thing happening with the chin. The bottom of his mouth would be further away from us, and then we're going to bring the mouth over top. Don't let that thought paralyze you because it's not a crisis. Nobody but us will notice that kind of thing, but it's just kind of a nice thing to kind of keep in mind. So I'll continue to go around the dinosaur, and then I will come in, I will do white. I'm going to change to white for the eyeball, and then I'll change back to black for doing the pupil and doing the nostril of that. And so when I am working with the other little dinosaur, let's swing him around. What I'll do is I'll do the visually furthest thing. So the horn here, he's kind of behind this one, so I'll do that in white. Then I'll come over here and I'll do his body, and then I'll work his yellow frill, And then I will do his face and frill coming up to there. We'll hop over. Then I'll come back and I'll do this horn that's laying on top of the one previous. And then our last bits will be the beak and his horn, and then the pupil and the eyeball, and then the pupil. So the only time I'm really planning on changing out thread is probably where I'm doing the white on that. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed this project. It's a lot of fun to do, and it's a really nice panel pattern. So even if you weren't doing the dinosaurs, you could take a panel that you can cut to 36 by 44, and you can create this bordered panel that's just a little bit more than just putting regular just strips around it. Doesn't take much work, but design-wise, it really gives you a spectacular look. So we'll see you next time on our creative videos.